The night on Aegis 9 was quiet. Only the soft hum of generators filled the dusty air. The human mechanic Mason sat alone in his workshop, his rough hands greasy from fixing an old cargo hauler. He had finished half his dinner, a plate of reheated protein stew, when he heard something strange. It wasn't the hiss of machines or the distant clatter of mining drones. It was a voice, soft, trembling, and full of hunger. "Can I have your leftovers?" Mason turned around slowly, expecting maybe one of the miners' kids who had wandered off. But what he saw made his hand freeze in midair. A small girl stood in the doorway, but she wasn't human. Her skin had a faint shimmer like cracked bronze scales. Her eyes glowed gold in the dim light, and small folded wings rested weakly against her back. She looked barely 12, yet she was a dragonkin, one of the most feared alien species in the galaxy. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind outside howled through the vents, carrying dust across the metal floor. Mason had seen soldiers shoot her kind on sight, after the last war ended with dragons declared extinct, and now one stood before him, starving, shaking, asking for scraps. He glanced at the half-eaten plate, then back at her. She didn't move, as if ready to run the moment he reached for his comlink. Her small claws dug into her worn clothes. Her voice broke again. "Please." "I haven't eaten in 3 days." Mason sighed and pushed the plate toward her. "You can have it," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. She stepped forward slowly, as if unsure it wasn't a trap. When her fingers brushed the edge of the plate, Mason noticed her hands, bruised, cracked, and bleeding from cold metal. She sat on the floor instead of the chair, curling her tail close as she began to eat. She didn't devour the food like a wild animal. She ate slowly, carefully, whispering thank you after each bite. The mechanic leaned back in his chair, watching her silently. "What's your name?" He finally asked Lyra. She said softly, not looking up. "I came from the sky, from the wreck." Mason frowned. He had heard rumors. A crashed alien ship in the northern dunes. The military had been sweeping the area for survivors. None were supposed to be left. "You came from that wreck?" She nodded, tears forming in her golden eyes. "They killed everyone. My mother told me to run. I didn't look back." Mason looked away. Pretending to check a tool, his throat tightened. He had fought in that war too, fixing ships that bombed her people. He had told himself he was just doing his job. But now, looking at the child before him, hungry and broken, it didn't feel like enough of an excuse. A red light flickered above the door. The security drone had detected motion. It hovered in, scanning the room with a cold blue lens. Mason's pulse quickened. The drone's sensors were sharp enough to detect non-human life signatures. Lyra froze, her wings twitching slightly. Mason acted fast, grabbing an old welding blanket from the bench and throwing it over the girl. He stepped forward, pretending to cough. "Just me here," he said, tapping the drone's side. Old filter vents acting up again. The drone whirred, scanning him head to toe, then beeped and floated back out. The red light faded, leaving silence behind. Lyra's trembling voice came from under the blanket. "You could have told them." Mason lifted the edge and looked at her. "Yeah," he said softly. "But I didn't." For the first time she smiled, a small, tired smile that made her seem less alien, more like a child. Mason rubbed the back of his neck, wondering what in the galaxy he had just done. He knew if the colony authorities found out, he'd be imprisoned for harboring a dragonkin. They'd say he betrayed humanity. Yet something inside him whispered that maybe humanity needed a reminder of what kindness looked like. He brought her a small blanket from the corner and set it near the heating coil. "You can stay here tonight, just keep quiet," he said. She nodded, curling up near the warm light, her wings shifting slightly. Mason turned off the main lamp and sat back, listening to her breathing slow as she drifted to sleep. For the first time in years, the workshop didn't feel empty outside. The desert winds howled across Aegis 9, carrying the scent of metal and dust somewhere far away. Patrol ships moved through the night, scanning for hostile remnants. Mason stared at the glowing coals in his heater, realizing his life had just changed. Tomorrow, the colony would wake as usual, and drills, alarms, guards shouting orders. But tonight, in a forgotten corner of a mining world, a human and a dragonkin shared a meal. And though Mason didn't know it yet, that small act of mercy would soon shake the stars. Morning came slowly on Aegis 9. The first light of the red sun spilled through the cracks in Mason's workshop. Painting long shadows across metal walls, Mason woke up stiff in his chair. his jacket still over his shoulders for a moment. He thought last night had been a dream, but then he heard a small sound. Quiet breathing from under the blanket near the heater. Lyra was still there, curled up like a small animal. Her wings rose and fell with each slow breath. She looked peaceful now, not like the frightened creature who had begged for food hours ago. Mason rubbed his eyes and sighed. "What have I done?" he muttered. He walked over to the food dispenser and set another portion to heat. The smell of warm stew filled the air. Lyra stirred and blinked, her golden eyes reflecting the light. She sat up slowly, hugging her knees. "You didn't turn me in," she said in a small voice. Mason handed her a steaming bowl. "Didn't see the point," he replied. "You're just a kid." Lyra accepted it carefully, her claws trembling as she held the bowl. "Most humans wouldn't think so," she whispered. "They call us monsters." Mason sat across from her, watching the shadows flicker on the walls. "Monsters don't say thank you after every bite," he said. She smiled faintly, the corner of her lips curving in a shy way. "Where I come from, we always thank the one who shares food," she said. It means peace. Something about those words stuck with him. In his years as a mechanic, he had fixed ships meant for war, refitted engines that carried bombs. He'd never thought much about peace, but now, a starving child was teaching him what it meant. The calm didn't last long. A heavy knock sounded at the door. Sharp, metallic like boots striking steel. Mason froze. Lyra's eyes widened. Her wings twitched nervously. "Stay quiet," he whispered, pulling a tarp over her again. He opened the door. 2 guards stood outside, both in colony uniforms, their visors reflecting the harsh morning light. One of them, Sergeant Hale, was a tall man with a scar across his cheek. "Morning, Mason," he said casually. "Got a minute?" Mason forced a calm smile. "Always do, Sergeant." Hale stepped inside without waiting, his boots echoing. "We're looking for a stray," he said. "Command says a dragonkin escaped the wreck north of here. Last seen near this sector." Mason's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He picked up a wrench and pretended to tighten a pipe. "Can't say I've seen anything that breathes fire lately," he joked weakly. The other guard, a woman with short blonde hair, scanned the room with a handheld detector. The device hummed and beeped softly. Each pulse made Mason's palms sweat. Behind him under the tarp, Lyra didn't move. Even her breathing seemed to stop. The guard frowned. "You live alone, right?" "Been that way for years," Mason said. "Easier to keep the place quiet." Hale gave him a long look. "If you do see anything, report it immediately. Command's offering a reward and 10,000 credits." Mason forced a chuckle. 10,000's tempting, but I'd rather not meet a dragon up close." They lingered a moment longer, scanning, listening. Then Hale nodded and turned for the door. "Stay sharp, Mason. They say this one's dangerous." "Sure thing," Mason said, keeping his voice steady. When the door finally closed, Mason let out a long breath. He turned and lifted the tarp. Lyra's eyes shimmered with tears. "They'll kill me if they find me," she whispered. He crouched down beside her. "Not if I can help it," he said. That was the moment something changed between them. It wasn't just a man helping a child anymore, it was a promise. As the day went on, Mason cleared a space behind a stack of engine parts, creating a small hidden corner. He placed a blanket there, a pillow and a few energy bars. "This'll be your spot," he said. "No one comes here but me." Lyra touched the rough blanket. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Mason hesitated, looking at the floor. "Because someone should have helped you before." She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than he said. Then she looked around the workshop, her golden eyes curious. "What is this place?" "My world," Mason said with a tired smile. "Engines, grease, and bad coffee." She tilted her head. "It smells strange." "Yeah, that's humanity's perfume," Mason said dryly. And she laughed, a soft, fragile laugh that made the whole room feel warmer. Over the next few hours, he taught her how to hold a spanner, how to turn bolts without stripping threads. Her claws were clumsy at first, but she learned quickly. "It listens to you," she said, amazed at the hum of the repaired motor. "Machines always listen," Mason said. "People not so much." As night returned, Lyra curled up in her new hiding place. Mason sat nearby, drinking bitter coffee. The moonlight from Aegis 9's twin moons poured through the cracked window. "Do you think your people will come for you?" Mason asked quietly. Lyra shook her head. "They're all gone," she said, voice soft like falling ash. "Humans destroyed our nests. I'm the last." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked away, guilt pressing in like the cold. She looked at him then, her voice gentle. You didn't destroy them. You gave me food. Mason couldn't speak. He just nodded and looked out at the stars beyond the window. The universe suddenly felt heavier. As Lyra drifted to sleep, Mason whispered to himself, You're safe here, kid. Outside, a surveillance drone floated by, its red light blinking through the window bars, but Mason didn't move. He sat silently, keeping watch over the small dragon girl who had changed his life in a single meal. And though he didn't know it yet, that kindness, that one choice, would soon draw the attention of powers far beyond Aegis 9. The next morning, the colony loudspeakers blared before dawn. Announcing a security lockdown, Mason woke up with a start. The metal walls shaking faintly from distant engines, Lyra was already awake, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked scared, clutching the blanket like it was armor outside. The sound of boots echoed down the narrow corridor. Soldiers. More than before, Mason walked to the window and peeked out. A convoy of armored vehicles was parked near the administration tower. Drones buzzed overhead like metal wasps, scanning every corner of the district. They're looking for me again, Lyra whispered. Her small wings trembling, Mason nodded. Yeah, and they're getting serious this time. He pulled down the blinds and turned off the lights. The workshop fell into a dim glow from the heater's coils. You stay quiet no matter what happens, Lyra nodded. But her eyes were filled with tears she refused to let fall. A few minutes later, a loud bang hit the door. Open up! Routine inspection. A voice barked. Mason's pulse jumped. He quickly shoved Lyra behind the tool cabinet, throwing a heavy tarp over her hiding spot. He wiped his hands on his work pants and walked to the door, trying to look half asleep. When the door opened, 3 guards stepped inside, 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing dark armor, with the colony insignia. The lead guard was Sergeant Hale again, his scar catching the light. Morning, Mason, he said in a tone that didn't sound friendly this time. You sure you haven't seen anything unusual lately? Mason crossed his arms, trying to act casual. Still working, still breathing, still broke, so no, nothing unusual. The female guard moved toward the back of the shop, scanning every shadow with her thermal reader. The device hummed as it painted red and blue outlines on her visor. Mason's throat went dry behind those crates. Lyra was holding her breath. Her heartbeat must have sounded like thunder to her. You live close to the crash site, Hale said, tapping his datapad. We've got signs that something non-human came through this sector 2 nights ago. Maybe it was one of your drones getting drunk, Mason muttered under his breath. The youngest guard laughed, but Hale didn't. He stared hard at Mason. You know the penalty for harboring an alien, right? Mason's jaw clenched. I read the signs. Sergeant, then you understand why we're thorough, Hale said, signaling to the others. Check everything. The guards spread out, one of them knocking over a pile of metal plates. Another opened a storage locker, scanning inside. Mason's mind raced. If they found Lyra, she was done for, and so was he. He decided to gamble. Hey, Sergeant, he said loudly, walking to the center of the room. You still owe me a filter change on your transport, remember? It's leaking fluid again, Hale frowned. That can wait. Not if you want that engine to catch fire halfway up the ridge, Mason replied, grabbing a wrench and tossing it onto the bench. The loud clang startled one of the guards, drawing their attention for just a second, enough time for Lyra to shift deeper behind the crates. The scanner beeped faintly, a soft warning tone. The female guard looked down at it. I'm getting a heat signature behind that pile. Hale turned sharply. Move the junk. Mason's stomach twisted. He took a step forward. Careful. That's the old fuel line, unstable as hell. You move that. The whole wall could... The sharp metallic snap echoed, followed by a hiss. The guard had accidentally loosened a rusted valve. A burst of vapor filled the air, hissing loudly as the pressure escaped. The scanner flashed red from the sudden temperature spike. Damn it! Hale shouted, waving the guard back. Get that shut off! Mason hurried forward, pretending to fix it, his hands moving fast to reseal the pipe. The steam filled the room like smoke. Thick enough to blind the scanners for a few seconds, Lyra stayed hidden, her small claws digging into the metal floor, praying silently. When the steam finally cleared, Hale cursed. We'll come back later, Mason. Make sure your safety lines aren't falling apart. Mason shrugged. Tell your men not to grab things they don't understand next time. Hale glared but said nothing more. He gestured to his squad and they left. The door shut behind them with a heavy clang that echoed through Mason's chest. He waited until the footsteps faded before moving to the back. He lifted the tarp carefully. "You okay?" Lyra crawled out, coughing softly. Her eyes were wet with fear. "I thought they'd find me." Mason nodded. "So did I." She looked at him, her voice small. "Why do you keep helping me?" He didn't answer right away. He sat down on the floor beside her, staring at the metal wall. "Because someone should have. A long time ago," he finally said. "I saw what we did to your kind, and I didn't stop it. Maybe this doesn't fix it, but it's something." Lyra looked down, her small claws twisting the edge of the blanket. "Back home, Dragon said humans had no hearts, but you're different," Mason chuckled softly. "Don't tell anyone. They'll take my license away for being kind." Lyra smiled faintly through her tears. Her golden eyes softened. "You're not like the others." That night, Mason reinforced the workshop door and turned off all outside lights. He set up a small sound jammer to block scanners. He was risking everything now, but there was no turning back. Lyra stayed close to him as he worked, her curiosity slowly replacing her fear. She asked about the tools, the engines, and the glowing wires that looked like veins of light. Mason answered every question, sometimes smiling, sometimes just shaking his head. Outside, the searchlight swept across the colony, loudspeakers warning everyone to report alien activity. But inside that small metal workshop, a strange kind of peace had formed. Mason didn't know how long he could protect her, or what the colony would do if they discovered the truth. But one thing he did know: the moment he shared that first meal, he'd already chosen his side, and somewhere deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. The world outside was changing. The war wasn't as over as people thought, and soon, both human and dragon alike would have to face what came next. The following night, the winds of Aegis 9 carried more than dust. They carried whispers, rumors, and the faint metallic taste of fear. Mason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The guards had been searching longer than usual, and the lights from the mining fields stayed on deep into the night. He glanced at Lyra, who sat quietly on the floor, trying to mend a broken circuit board with her small claws. She looked different now, a little stronger, a little less afraid. Her scales had regained some shine, and her wings no longer drooped completely. Mason leaned against the wall, wiping his hands. "You learn fast," he said. Lyra smiled softly. "Machines are easy. They tell you what's wrong if you listen," he chuckled. "You sound like an old engineer." She looked up, her golden eyes curious. "Do you listen to machines too?" "Used to," Mason said, glancing toward the window. "Now I listen to people, though they don't make much sense either." Lyra tilted her head, sensing the unease in his tone. "Something's coming, isn't it?" He nodded. "Yeah, the air feels different. The whole colony's on edge." Late that evening, Mason decided to check the underground tunnels. They had once been used to store mining fuel and spare parts, but most were now sealed, or so the colony claimed. He knew one tunnel still connected directly beneath his workshop. It was dangerous, but it was also the only place he could hide Lyra if things got worse. "Grab your jacket," he whispered. "We're going underground." Lyra looked uncertain. "Is it safe?" "Not really," Mason said, "but safer than up here." He pulled a rusty panel aside, revealing a narrow hatch that led into darkness. The smell of oil and iron rose from below. Lyra followed him down the ladder, her claws clicking softly against the rungs. The tunnel was cold and damp. Pipes ran along the walls, dripping condensation. Mason's flashlight cut a thin line of light through the dark, illuminating old crates and abandoned mining carts. Lyra stayed close, her wings folded tightly against her back. They walked for several minutes until the tunnel widened into an old storage chamber. Dust floated in the beam of the flashlight. Mason scanned the walls, noticing strange new markings, bright white numbers freshly painted. "These weren't here before," he muttered. Lyra touched one of the walls, frowning. "There's something below," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. "It feels alive," Mason frowned. "Alive?" She nodded. "Like it's breathing." He crouched and placed his hand on the metal floor. At first he felt nothing, then faintly, a rhythmic vibration. Slow, steady, almost like a heartbeat. He pulled his hand back quickly, his eyes narrowing. "That's not machinery," he said under his breath. They followed the sound deeper, and soon came across a newly sealed gate, guarded by fresh security locks. Mason examined it closely. The locks weren't colony-grade and they were military, newer than anything the miners used. Someone had been building something down here, something they didn't want anyone to find. Lyra's voice was quiet. Humans are making something big. Yeah, Mason said grimly. And they don't want us to see it. A faint blue glow leaked from the cracks around the gate. Lyra stepped closer, her pupils narrowing. I know this light, she said. It's the same as the dragon hearts. When they're still beating, Mason stared at her. Dragon hearts? You mean? She nodded, her eyes glistening. Our hearts are full of core fire, the strongest energy in the galaxy if they've found a way to use it. She trailed off, her voice shaking. Mason's stomach turned cold. You think they're using your people as power sources? Lyra's silence was answer enough. He turned off the flashlight and stood still in the dark. His thoughts raced. The colony hadn't been expanding mining operations. They had been digging deeper, building beneath the ground. And now it all made sense in the security. The new tech, the nervous guards. Mason clenched his fists. If they're using those hearts to power weapons... Lyra touched his arm gently. You can't stop them alone. He looked down at her, the light from her eyes reflecting off the metal walls. Maybe not. But I can't just walk away either. They made their way back to the workshop in silence. When they climbed out of the hatch, the night wind hit them, carrying the faint hum of colony generators far away. Mason sealed the hatch again and dragged heavy crates over it. Hiding any trace, Lyra sat on the workbench, her wings trembling slightly. I can still feel it, she said quietly. So many hearts. They're trapped down there. Mason poured himself a cup of cold coffee, staring at nothing. You said your mother was on one of those ships, he said. Lyra nodded slowly. She told me to run. She said the humans wanted our fire. He slammed the cup down, the metal clanging. They always want what they don't understand. She looked at him, her voice small but steady. If they finish the weapon, it will burn everything, even your people. He looked at her, the weight of her words pressing deep into his chest. Then we have to stop it. Lyra blinked in surprise. We? You think I'm letting you go back down there alone? He said, forcing a small grin. I might be stupid, but not that stupid. For the first time since they met, Lyra laughed, and a sound like wind over glass. Soft and bright, Mason smiled faintly, though his heart felt heavy. He didn't know how they would stop the weapon or what waited below. But one thing was clear. The secret buried beneath Aegis 9 wasn't just a threat to dragons. It was a threat to everyone. As the colony lights flickered in the distance and the storm outside began to rise, Mason knew this was the beginning of something far larger than either of them. A mechanic and a dragon girl, standing together against a world built on fear, and beneath their feet, the secret heartbeat of a weapon waited to awaken. The next night fell heavy over Aegis 9. The winds carried fine dust that glittered like ash under the colony lights. Mason hadn't slept every time he closed his eyes. He saw the glow under the tunnels. That strange heartbeat in the metal. Lyra sat near the heater, tracing circles on the floor with her claw, both of them too restless for words. When the power flickered for the third time that evening, Mason stood abruptly. That's it. We're going back down. Lyra looked up, startled. But the guards? They won't be checking the tunnels tonight, Mason said. They'll be busy fixing the power drops. We have a window. And I'm done pretending I don't know what's happening. Lyra hesitated, then nodded. She grabbed her small pack and followed him to the corner of the workshop.
Mason pulled the crates aside and opened the hatch again. A gust of cold, stale air hit them,
smelling faintly of iron and something faintly sweet, like burned fuel mixed with blood. They climbed down, their lights cutting through the dark. The tunnel seemed quieter than before, as if holding its breath. The hum they'd heard last time was stronger now, vibrating through the walls like a living pulse. Stay close, Mason whispered. They moved deeper, their boots splashing in shallow puddles. Old mining signs hung half-fallen from the ceiling, warning about radiation, energy leaks, and unstable ground. But these warnings were nothing compared to what lay ahead. When they reached the sealed gate again, Mason knelt beside it, pulling a small toolkit from his belt. The lock was newer than the rest of the structure, sleek, black and humming faintly. Military grade, he muttered. This'll take time. Lyra crouched beside him. Can I help? He looked at her, unsure, then nodded. See that small circle under the panel? Touch it gently. Maybe your scales can trick the biosensor. She pressed her claw against the glass pad. It flickered red, then green. The lock clicked open. Mason stared at her in surprise. Remind me never to underestimate dragon tech. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast chamber below. Mason's breath caught in his throat. The room was enormous, large enough to hold an entire ship. Tubes of blue light ran across the ceiling, feeding into dozens of transparent pods that pulsed like beating hearts. Lyra froze, her voice breaking. Those are dragon hearts, Mason finished, his voice low and horrified. Inside the pods, glowing cores floated, each one wrapped in veins of metal and cables, pumping energy through conduits that led to a massive central reactor. The entire facility was alive with movement, engineers and soldiers working silently, their faces lit by the eerie glow. Mason ducked behind a control console, pulling Lyra down beside him. They're draining energy from them, he whispered. Like batteries. Lyra's hand shook. That one, she pointed toward the largest pod at the center. That's my mother's. I can feel it, Mason turned sharply. Are you sure? Tears filled her eyes. A dragon's heart never forgets its song. I can hear hers, Mason's gut twisted. The pod she pointed at glowed more brightly than the others, almost white, feeding thick cables that disappeared into the reactor's base. They're using it as the main power source, he said. His voice tight. They're building something. Maybe a weapon, maybe worse. Footsteps echoed from a nearby platform. Mason and Lyra ducked lower as two scientists passed by, talking in hushed voices. Final calibration's almost complete, one said. Once the reactor stabilizes, Command can deploy the purifier anywhere in the system. The purifier? The other asked. That thing can wipe out whole species. Exactly, the first replied with a grim smile. That's the point. The conversation faded as they walked away. Mason clenched his fists. They're making a species killer, powered by your people's hearts. Lyra wiped her tears angrily. We have to stop it. He looked at her, small, fragile, but her eyes burned with fierce fire, stronger than fear. We can't destroy it yet, he said, thinking fast. If we blow it now, they'll seal the tunnels. No one will ever know the truth. Then what do we do? She whispered. Mason studied the nearest terminal. We steal proof. He connected a small device to the console, fingers flying over the keys. Lines of data scrolled across the screen. Energy signatures, operation logs, genetic records, all evidence of what the colony was hiding. Lyra stood guard, her eyes scanning the shadows. Someone's coming, she whispered. Almost done, Mason said, his heart pounding. Just one more. A light beam flashed across their faces. Hey, who's there? Mason yanked the drive from the terminal and grabbed Lyra's hand. Run. They sprinted through the lower catwalks as alarms blared. Red lights filled the chamber, soldiers shouting orders. Blaster shots cracked through the air, sparks raining down as energy bolts struck the metal walls. Lyra spread her wings instinctively, catching air that wasn't meant for flight. This way, she cried, leading him toward a maintenance shaft. They slid inside just as the guards reached the platform. Mason slammed the hatch behind them, gasping for breath. You okay? Lyra nodded, clutching the small pack against her chest. Did you get it? He held up the glowing data drive. Yeah, and this little thing might just save the galaxy. The tunnel shook from a distant explosion. The reactor was powering up again. The hum grew louder, deeper, like a storm about to break. Mason grabbed her hand and started climbing. When they reached the surface and stumbled back into the workshop, both were covered in grime, hearts pounding. Mason sealed the hatch again and leaned against the wall. We can't stay here, he said. They'll trace the breach. Lyra looked at him, her expression hard but determined. Then we go to the stars. We show the truth. Mason looked at her, a child carrying the fire of her people, a human carrying the guilt of his kind. All right, he said with a tired grin. Then let's make them listen. Outside, the colony alarms wailed across the horizon. Somewhere beneath their feet, the purifier pulsed with the stolen light of 1,000 hearts. But for the first time, Mason and Lyra had hope. And a plan. They didn't know it yet, but their discovery tonight would ignite a fire that no army could contain. A mechanic and a dragon girl, about to defy an empire built on silence. The storm over Aegis 9 grew worse with every passing hour. Wind howled against metal walls. and lightning flashed over the colony domes like angry veins across the sky. Inside the small workshop, Mason paced back and forth, his hands stained with oil and dust. The data drive he had stolen sat on the table, its blue light blinking slowly, a reminder of the danger they were now in. Lyra sat on the floor beside the heater, her wings folded tight, watching him with silent worry. "They'll come soon," she said softly. "You know they will." Mason nodded without looking up. "Yeah, I know." He was trying to think, but his thoughts were a blur of noise. Soldiers, alarms, the haunting glow of the reactor, and her mother's heart trapped in that machine. He finally stopped pacing and looked at her. "Lyra, listen to me. What's in this drive, and it's proof of everything. It can bring the Federation, the media, everyone down on them, but we need to send it off-world before they catch us." Lyra tilted her head. "Off-world? How?" "There's an old transmitter in the Northern Canyon," Mason said. "Decommissioned after the war. But I can fix it if we reach it before dawn. We can broadcast the data to every open frequency. Once it's out there, no one can bury the truth." Lyra stood, determination lighting her golden eyes. "Then we go." Mason shook his head. "It's not that easy. The military won't let us leave the sector. They'll lock down every route once they realize the data's missing." "Then we go now," she said, her small claws curling. Before they realized, he stared at her. This tiny being who had every reason to hate humans but still trusted him. "You're brave, you know that?" He said quietly. Lyra gave a faint smile. "You taught me that." They packed quickly. Mason filled a small bag with tools, spare rations, and a pulse pistol he hadn't used in years. The air outside was freezing, and the storm whipped dust across the ground like knives. As they stepped into the dark, Mason sealed the workshop door behind them for the last time. They moved through the alleyways, staying in the shadows. Searchlights cut through the night, and distant shouts echoed from the upper decks. Mason led the way toward the edge of the colony. His boots sinking into the sand, Lyra followed close behind, her glowing eyes dimmed by the hood of his old jacket. When they reached the outer gates, 2 guards stood watch, their rifles slung across their chests. Mason's heart pounded. There was no way to sneak past without being seen. Lyra tugged his sleeve, whispering, "I can distract them." "No," Mason hissed. "They'll kill you." But she shook her head, her voice calm. "They won't expect a dragon child to talk." Before he could stop her, she stepped into the light. The guards froze instantly, rifles raising. "Don't shoot," Mason shouted, stepping forward too. "She's just a kid." The guards hesitated, their helmets reflecting the stormlight. "Identify yourself," one barked. Mason raised his hands. "I'm Mason Core, Mechanic Class 397. I found her wandering outside the tunnels. I was bringing her in for inspection." The guard frowned. "Protocol says to call command first." "Fine," Mason said, lowering his voice. "But command's not gonna like hearing you let a dangerous alien wander near the reactor zones while you stood here arguing. You really want that on your record?" The guard hesitated, glancing at his partner. "Fine. Take her to the detainment wing. We'll log it after the shift." Mason nodded quickly, leading Lyra through the gate. Only when they were out of sight did they start running again. The path to the canyon was steep and littered with old mining wrecks. The wind screamed through the cliffs. Carrying fine shards of sand that cut like glass, Mason led the way, guiding Lyra through the debris until they found the half-buried transmitter station. It was ancient, rusted, leaning, but still mostly intact. He set his bag down and pried open the control panel. Sparks flew as he reconnected the power cells. Come on," he muttered. Lyra helped where she could, holding wires steady with trembling claws. "Is it working?" she asked, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Almost," Mason said. "Just need to boost the signal." Behind them, a low rumble echoed. Engines, multiple aircraft approaching fast. Lyra's eyes widened. "They found us!" Mason gritted his teeth. "Keep working," he said. "We can't stop now." The transmitter's lights flickered, then stabilized. The screen came alive, displaying the ancient network grid. Mason jammed the data drive into the port, transferring the files. "Signal ready," the machine chirped. He turned to Lyra, shouting over the storm, "When I give the word, pull that lever and don't stop. It'll beam the data to every comm array across the sector." "What about you?" she shouted back. Mason looked toward the horizon where the gunships were approaching, their searchlights sweeping the ground. "Someone's got to keep them busy," he said. "They can't know what we're sending." Lyra's eyes filled with panic. No, we do this together. He smiled faintly. You already did your part, kid. You made me remember what being human means. Before she could argue, he stepped outside into the open. The storm whipped around him as he fired the pulse pistol into the air, drawing the gunship's attention. Energy bolts rained down, striking the sand around him. Lyra watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mason, she screamed, pull the lever. He shouted, his voice echoing through the storm. She hesitated, then slammed it down. The transmitter roared to life, beams of light shooting skyward as the data burst through the clouds. The gunships turned their weapons toward the tower, but it was too late. A blinding explosion lit the canyon as the power core overloaded. Mason's figure vanished in the fire and dust. The shockwave threw Lyra back and everything went dark. When she awoke, the storm had ended. The tower was nothing but twisted metal, and the sky above was clear. A single transmission light blinked faintly in the wreckage. The data had gone through. Lyra stumbled to her feet, clutching Mason's old jacket to her chest. The horizon glowed with the first light of dawn. She whispered softly, "You did it, somewhere across the stars." Mason's final message, the proof of humanity's sins and one man's courage, spread across every channel. Every world would soon know what Aegis 9 had hidden, and though Mason was gone, his choice would change everything. A human's kindness had defied an empire, and a dragon child's tears marked the beginning of something new, far away, above the clouds. The message played in countless languages, Mason's recorded voice saying, "If a human can share a meal, he can share peace." Those words would echo through the galaxy forever. News spread faster than light, before the sun even rose over Aegis 9. Mason's broadcast had reached half the galaxy. Every screen, every holoboard, every ship receiver flickered with the same image, a tired human in a dirty mechanic's jacket. Speaking into an old transmitter, his face was worn, his voice steady but filled with quiet fire. "This isn't a war between species," Mason's message said. "It's a war between those who build and those who destroy. If a human can share a meal, he can share peace one day across hundreds of systems." The words echoed. Humans stopped working, soldiers froze mid-patrol, and alien colonies long afraid of human ships looked up at the message in disbelief. For decades, dragons had been called monsters, their extinction celebrated as victory. But now, the truth burned on every screen. The reactors, the hearts, the suffering beneath Aegis 9. By the time the military tried to jam the signal, it was too late. The story had already been shared millions of times. Mason's name became a whisper of rebellion, the mechanic who defied the system, the man who gave his life for a dragon child. Lyra watched it all from the cargo bay of a small freighter leaving the colony. Wrapped in Mason's old jacket, her eyes were fixed on the transmission replaying again and again. His voice filled the cabin, each word cutting through her grief and giving it shape. The pilot, a quiet miner who had helped them escape, looked back. "You knew him." Lyra nodded slowly. "He was my friend." The man sighed, shaking his head. "He changed everything, you realize that?" Lyra looked out the window where Aegis 9 shrank behind them, a dull red sphere fading into the dark. "He didn't just change things," she said softly. "He reminded people what being human means." As the freighter slipped into the trade lanes, messages flooded the communication lines. Colonies demanded answers, federations called for inquiries, and humans across the stars began asking a single question. Why did a mechanic care more than the generals? Within days, protests erupted. Civilians blocked ships carrying military supplies, pilots refused orders, mechanics on other colonies left food at their doors. Marked with a small dragon symbol, the sign of the shared meal, Lyra traveled in silence. Hiding in the lower decks, her heart ached. But she carried Mason's drive, the full recording of his mission and the codes to the reactor's network. It was proof of what he'd done, proof that could stop more weapons from being built. Weeks later, she reached the central capital of the Galactic Council. The skies were silver, and massive towers pierced the clouds. Security was tight, but when she stepped onto the plaza wearing a mechanic's jacket with the name M Core stitched on the sleeve, the crowd parted. She climbed the steps, holding the drive above her head. This was his last message. She shouted, "The human who gave his life for truth." The crowd fell silent. The screens above switched on again, replaying Mason's voice one more time. "If a human can share a meal, He can share peace. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry out of sadness. She cried because she could feel him there, in every word, every breath, every heartbeat around her. Humanity wasn't just capable of cruelty. It was also capable of redemption that night. The Galactic Council voted to end all xenobiological weapons programs. The reactor on Aegis 9 was dismantled, and the Dragon Hearts were returned to the stars in a ceremony broadcast to every world. At the edge of the galaxy, a new colony began construction, not for war, but for unity. It was called the Mason Accord Station, a place where humans and dragons could work together. Lyra stood before the monument that marked its center. A large metal plate rested under glass, the same plate that once held Mason's simple meal. Beside it, carved in both human and dragon language, were his final words. "Kindness is not weakness. It's the start of everything strong." Lyra placed her hand on the glass, her golden eyes glowing softly. "I wish you could see this," she whispered. They finally listened. Behind her, children ran through the plaza, human and dragonkin together, laughing, building small machines out of scrap. The sound filled the air like music. As night fell, she looked up at the stars, a faint smile touching her lips. Somewhere out there, she liked to believe Mason's spirit was still fixing engines in the dark, still teaching someone how to listen to the hum of the universe. The wind brushed against her wings, carrying a warmth that felt like home. She whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Mason." And as the stars blinked back, the galaxy kept the promise of one human's final act. A spark of kindness powerful enough to light the dark forever.